the sad thing is that mussels in general are actually who's eating most of the calories that we consume. And if you lose 40% of your muscle mass in a year, and then you stop the drug because it's no longer working, which it no longer works, you way overshoot because you go back to your eating patterns. The other thing that concerns me, at least in animal studies, is that animals on these drugs long term all get inflammation of their pancreas. And that bothers me a whole lot.
Dr. Stephen Gundry, welcome to the American Glutton Podcast.
It's pleasure to be here talking about gluttony.
Gluttony, that is the whole deal. I want to talk to you about the state of health in America, but also I want you to, I've lost almost 300 pounds. And so the primary focus, even when I was a little kid, has been for me weight loss. And many times I've been, especially with my parents, they would tell me, well, if you just handle this health problem that I didn't perceive as a problem, like candida, you will lose all the weight you need to. And that never seemed to work. So I want to talk to you about all of these things. What are your thoughts on the current state of health in America?
What bad part do you want to talk about first?
There's nothing good, huh?
There's really nothing good. It's just been a downward spiral since the mid-1970s. So,
yeah. And do you think that's due entirely to processed foods, or I mean, there was processed foods before the 1970s. So what happened in the 1970s that led us down this spiral?
Well, yeah, first of all, believe it or not, back in the early 1900s, when the Kellogg's brothers introduced Kellogg's cornflakes, they were actually advertised as the world's first pre-digested food.
Come on.
I kid you not. And the Kellogg's brothers in Battle Creek felt that digestion was one of the main contributors to bad health, and that if you could pre-digest the food, then all that work of digestion could give you more energy, etc. So they literally advertised it as the world's first pre-digested food. So
is that what they basically, is that the model for how they made their cornflakes? They just figured out, how does the body digest it? Let's take that step out and sell something that has that process already happened.
That's exactly right. So that literally over 100 years ago, ultra-processed foods existed. So there's a rush, of course, to blame ultra-processed foods. And certainly in all my books, there's good blame to go around for ultra-processed foods. But they've been around for a long time. And up until really the 70s, most Americans were remarkably thin. And what happened in the 70s? Well, several things. First of all, broad-spectrum antibiotics were introduced. I was actually in medical school in the middle 1970s when broad-spectrum antibiotics were made, and they were miraculous. Before we had to, if somebody had an infection, we had to try to culture the bacteria. Then we had to test antibiotics against it. It would take days. When broad-spectrum antibiotics came out, now we had an Aquate 47 set on automatic, and we could just mow down anything in our path. Now, little did we know that we were also mowing down our gut microbiome. Killed it off great. We just didn't know that that's what was happening. So the gut microbiome is hugely important in telling us what to eat and how much of something to eat. And maybe we can dive into that. The second thing that happened, literally simultaneously, is that Monsanto patented Roundup, glyphosate. And they actually patented glyphosate as an antibiotic, not as an herbicide. And and
We were meant to be ingesting that.
yeah, and we were assured that glyphosate killed plants, weeds, by interfering with a cellular production pathway called the shikimate pathway. Love that word. And that humans don't use the shikimate pathway. So they convinced the FDA that we could drink a gallon of glyphosate and nothing would happen to us. What they didn't bother to tell anybody is that bacteria use the shikimate pathway. And so glyphosate is really good at killing our microbiome as well. And that's just two of the factors.
All right.
The third thing, I'll add one more. The third thing, at literally the same time, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs were introduced. Things like ibuprofen, Aleve, naproxen, Advil. And when they were introduced, they were by prescription only, and you could only prescribe them for 2 weeks before you had to stop them because they were so dangerous. And
I've heard people can have liver problems from taking these, but were they in a different form that was more dangerous? You could take Advil every single day now.
It's the problem. And as I write about in the book, one Advil is like swallowing a hand grenade, and it literally blows a giant hole in the wall of your gut. And that causes you, like I talk about in the book, to have pain. You're taking it for pain, but it actually causes more pain, which means you're going to take more. And it's a wonderful vicious cycle. And it's really good for killing kidneys, by the way. So those three things, and there's plenty of others, are one of the almost simultaneously in the mid-1970s started to change things.
Yeah, because there's been sugar. Sugar's been around forever. Coca-Cola's been around forever. And then, I hear that the theory is that it's the high fructose corn syrup and it's not the sugar. And like, I understand that it's cheaper to produce. And so this cost of the soda is static or goes down. I think places like McDonald's and AMC, you pay for the cup and not for the soda because the cup is actually more expensive. Right. And so there's more of it to drink, but I don't remember seeing any signs of obesity as a little kid in the 70s. And I understand you're saying that's when it really began. But like, in order for me to go clothes shopping, I had to go to the big and tall man store. You couldn't get sizes to fit me at Target. And now you can get up to 5XL at Target. So the times have really shifted in the last 40 years.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And it can't just be high fructose corn syrup. So I think there's a lot of factors in here, but those are interesting factors. When I was a kid, if I would take antibiotics, my mom would always give me a course of acidophilus afterwards. Is that enough to repair the microbiome?
I wish it was. It's not. We now know, for instance, we have about 100 trillion bacteria in our guts alone. And we've got, 10,000 different bacterial species in our mouth, 700 different species on our skin. And as I talk about in the book, this is basically a tropical rainforest, what I call the terrain. And there's all these interdependent species. And everything's fine as long as, to paraphrase Hillary Clinton, it takes a village. And you've got all these interdependent species, and good guys kind of keep the bad guys in their place, but you got to have some bad guys. But then if somebody overgrows, or if you knock out a bunch of these, then the survivors can kind of take over. And so just replacing one bug or two bugs isn't gonna cut it. The other thing that I think people should realize, living in California, where we have lots of forest fires, um, you can burn a forest down to the ground, and you could plant little seedlings like probiotics, but it's going to take 20 or 30 years for that forest to become a forest again. And one of the things I've learned, and I still see patients 6 days a week, that it can take 9 months, a year, or longer to restore the forest back to a forest, even after one round of antibiotics.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, but then there's it did I didn't know that prior to broad spectrum you'd have to do cultures and find the exact antibiotic that would work. I didn't
Yep.
know that. But so now if you're really sick, the antibiotic is worth it to keep you alive.
Correct. And I'm not telling anyone don't take antibiotics, but well over 50% of antibiotics are prescribed for viral infections, and it has no effect on viruses.
Yeah, I know my wife always travels with a Z-Pack and, we'll get a cold and think I got to take the Z-Pack. And I'm like, that's not really how that works.
Yeah,
Those don't fight
exactly
those
right.
bugs. But so, and I know I have a lot of friends who will take an antibiotic for basically any sickness. Um, does part of the, and I've also read that the overuse of antibiotics creates bugs that are resistant and makes them harder to fight. So we do by behaving that way are actually making these things obsolete to some degree.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, what's fascinating is bacteria exchange information all the time. They actually exchange genes. One bacteria bumps up to the other guy, and he basically says, "Hey, I've got some genes that make me resistant to this particular antibiotic. Would you like those genes too?" And the other guy says, "Yeah, I don't want to get killed by an antibiotic. Send it over." And so it literally sends that information over to the next bacteria. And you're right. Once you get an antibiotic resistant bacteria, it likes to spread the wealth, and it's not a good thing.
Right. So, okay, in the landscape where I don't know a single person who hasn't taken antibiotics, who hasn't consumed glyphosate to some degree, and also like Advil, that's another one. Like, I would be hard pressed to find somebody who's never taken an Advil. Given those circumstances, what's the solution there? How do you populate and have a flourishing microbiome?
Well, and that's kind of the point of all my books, and the most current book, the gut brain paradox. There's three things that I think anybody can do. Number one, almost all of us, even you folks living in Florida or me in California, are vitamin D deficient. And vitamin D, unfortunately, we all wear sunscreen, and if we're out in the sun, we wear a long sleeve shirt or something and a hat. And so we don't make much vitamin D anymore. Vitamin D is essential to repair the wall of our gut, which is critical for our health. But number two, studies show that the higher your vitamin D level, the more diverse your microbiome is, the more tropical rainforest it is, the more species it has. So the University of California, San Diego has a big vitamin D research group, and they think the average American, should take 10,000 international units a day of vitamin D3. 10,000. That's a lot.
Not just go out in the sun?
No, unfortunately, you're never going to get enough vitamin D from the sun, ever. Because if you get a tan, you actually start blocking the absorption of vitamin D or the production of vitamin D. I mean, I have golfers here in Palm Springs who are, black with suntan. They have very low vitamin D.
Wow.
So that's number one. Number two, everybody now pretty much understands probiotics, friendly bacteria. The problem is friendly bacteria in a way are like grass seed. As I joke here in Palm Springs, I could sell my patients grass seed and they'll come back 3 months later and said, you sold me bad grass seed. It didn't grow. And
It didn't take.
oh, well, did you water it? Well, no, it didn't tell me to. Well, did you fertilize it? No, it didn't tell me to. Well, what do you expect? You threw it out on the sand and you got to do these things. It's the same way with these friendly bacteria. We now know what they like to eat and what they need to eat, and primarily it's prebiotic fiber. And prebiotic fiber is actually pretty easy to come by. It's in the chicory family of vegetables like radicchio, like Belgian endive. It's in asparagus. It's in artichokes, artichoke hearts. It's in Jerusalem artichokes, sunchokes. So that's inulin. That's a great prebiotic fiber. It's in tubers like radishes, like carrots, like jicama, like sweet potatoes. So that's another easy way to get it. But research that was done in Stanford gave a bunch of healthy people a bunch of prebiotic fiber called inulin. And they looked at their gut microbiome diversity and they looked at markers of inflammation. And despite getting all this prebiotic fiber, they didn't have more diversity, they didn't have less inflammation. And they're going, well, that's funny. We're giving them what they want to eat. What are we missing? So they repeated the experiment, but this time they gave them fermented foods. In this case, it was yogurts and kefir. And the inulin, the prebiotic fiber. And then, and only then, did they get more gut diversity and lower inflammation. So the point of all this is, and I talk a lot about it in the book, getting fermented foods into you is a good idea. Now, most Americans hate fermented foods. We don't like sour stuff. It's not part of our culture. But one thing we actually do like are vinegars. We like salad dressings. And so vinegar is a great prebiotic fermented food. And I'm actually the inventor of the healthy Coke, where you put balsamic vinegar in sparkling water. And I did that many years ago. And so all the new TikTokers, go look at my old videos and you'll see it. So, and that's an easy way. So if you want to put apple cider vinegar in some water, take a shot of.
But it has to be the one with the mother, right? It can't be.
So, even the plain old stuff is just fine. The mother's better because that has more postbiotics, but plain old vinegar off the shelf will still do the job.
Right. And, okay, so that is the way to flourish. Do you have to get that, the fiber through like living things, or is there a tablet you can take?
Yeah, believe it or not, there are a lot of tablets or powders. So, for instance, there's inulin powder that you can, and it has a slight sweet taste, so you can even sweeten your coffee with it or your yogurt. My favorite is a relatively new sweetener called allulose. Allulose is a true sugar. It was first discovered in figs, but it's a prebiotic fiber. It actually lowers blood sugar. And it feeds friendly bacteria. In fact, I like it so much, I make it at Gundry MD, my supplement and food company. Another one of my favorites is psyllium fiber, psyllium husks.
Yeah.
Those are easy. You can either use a powder or a capsule. The other one I like a lot is chicory root. And you can get that as a powder or a capsule. And it's an easy way to do it.
Okay. And if in terms of weight loss, because like my first question was about health, and you've said it's been declining since the 1970s. The thing that I've noticed the most since the 1970s is an increase in weight. This is what you're saying is regulating hunger?
Yeah, it turns out we there's been ever since the Human Microbiome project was completed in 2017, we always thought that hunger was driven initially by our brain, that it was driven by parts of our brain like the hypothalamus, and that it was kind of independent of everything else. Then we discovered hormones that came from what we thought were neurons in the gut. Hormones like CCK, GLP-1. And we thought that there were neurons in the gut that made these hormones. Now, come to find out that all of these hormones are actually made by gut bacteria, not our neurons. So, why do they do this? There's a really interesting theory, which I like a lot, which is the gut-centric theory of hunger. And by that, I mean that normally our great-great-grandparents ate whole foods and they ate them whole. And nobody does that anymore. And when they ate these things, yeah, we would digest a lot of this stuff and we'd absorb sugars and proteins and fats, but there would be a lot left over that we could not digest. And these were these long chain carbohydrates, these resistant starches, and they'd kind of filter down to our colon, and the good guys down in our colon goes, here comes dinner. This was great. That's what we want to eat. So they then, when they get enough, they make these hormones that go to the brain, say, okay, we've got our needs met. You don't have to go looking for anything else. We're good. That worked extremely well. But one of the problems with ultra processed foods is all that stuff that we used to eat has been removed. And so those guys down in our colon, they can hear us chewing, they hear us swallowing, and they're going, okay, here it comes, yum, yum, yum. A couple hours, it'll be here. And it never arrives. So then what they do is they literally send other text messages to the brain saying, what the heck? Where is it? We're starving to death. Go find some more and keep doing it until we tell you to stop. And it never arrives. There was a really cool experiment done in China a couple of years ago where they put people on a 14-day water fast, water only fast. And half the people in the group got 100 calories a day of prebiotic fiber. We could not digest it. They could not absorb it, but it's what fed gut bacteria. The guys who got the prebiotic fiber had no hunger on a water fast for 14 days.
Wow.
The guys who didn't, they're going, I'm really hungry. Why? Because the gut bacteria said, great, our needs are met. Thank you very much. You don't need to go looking for anything else.
And this was not, you said 100 calories?
100 calories.
And was this, 100 calories, what is that? That's like a handful of cabbage or,
It was just pure, it's pure prebiotic fiber. That's just like a tablespoon of fiber. That's it.
Oh, okay. They weren't eating 100 calories of vegetables.
They weren't eating anything.
Right.
Yeah, it was just dissolved in water.
Wow.
It's the only difference.
That's wild. Well, I do know, I not long ago tried to up my fiber intake. I wasn't thinking about pre or post or soluble or insoluble. I was just getting it all through vegetables, and it was tough, man. It was tough. You have to eat a lot if you're going to get your fiber that way.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, a gorilla eats 16 pounds of leaves every day. Go ahead, try it.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, I used to kid my patients. So a 1 by 1 inch piece of cheese has about 150 calories. You could go to the store and buy a bag of romaine lettuce, which has about 30 calories. So you'd have to eat 5 bags of romaine lettuce to get the equivalent calories in one piece of cheese. Now, I've done this experiment. I got through 2.5 bags of romaine lettuce before.
You can't do it. You tap out. Your body just says no. Yeah.
I could easily eat 10 pieces of cheese,
Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is really hard to do that.
Yeah. I think that, and we are, the landscape of today is convenience. It is efficiency. We want, I think about this often. When I was a little kid, we would go and visit my grandparents in Vermont, and they had a cornfield. The neighbors had a cornfield, and we would play in the cornfield every day. That was where we went out and we played tag, and we had little things built throughout the maze of the cornfield. And I went, my grandparents are both passed on, almost 50 years later. But a year ago, I took my kids to see where I would play as a kid in Vermont. And there's still a cornfield there. Efficiency has made it possible that you can plant corn on top of corn. You can't walk into the cornfield anymore. It was the wildest thing. I was trying to explain to them. And my kids will never experience that because nobody plants corn like that, where every stalk of corn had to be a foot away from the next stalk of corn. And now they're literally growing like leaves of grass. It's wild. But that kind of efficiency, reduces not just the fact that kids can no longer play in the cornfield, but like every aspect of our life. You can get 2,500 calories for $3 at the gas station. You can have that delivered to you for another $3. You know what I mean? You don't even have to type it into your phone anymore. You just push one button, or you set your phone to like listen for the cue and then say it into it. But all of this leads to a life where I have to struggle every day. And my current struggle is that I'm inclined, when I was 500 pounds, every action was through this lens of like, it's going to be really hard for me to move over to that side of the room. I have to do it in the most efficient way possible. I have to think ahead constantly and be as efficient with my use of energy as possible. And I'm still burdened by that. So now I have to go against that and go like, no, I want extra steps. I want to find the furthest parking spot. I want to find this. But the fight against food is really, really hard. I've maintained this weight now for 6 years. And though I've been on a diet basically for 40 years and I fluctuated back and forth, I've now maintained it for 6 years. But every single day, I have to remind myself, like, I don't really mess with McDonald's. I don't moralize it. I don't say it's good or bad. It's just not for me.
True.
It's a really tough spot to be in and to sell people on when they now have medications that will turn hunger off.
Yeah. And what people, for instance, I won't prescribe these medications in my practice, because first of all, if you look at any of the human studies, all humans on these drugs plateau, stop losing weight after about a year. Interestingly enough, there's been some placebo-controlled trials where people are put on, we'll just say Ozempic, and then at 6 months, half of them continue the Ozempic. The other half still shoot themselves up with what they think is Ozempic, but it's not, it's water. And the group that gets the Ozempic does continue to trickle down weight. But the group that thinks they're shooting themselves up with Ozempic, they rebound beyond where they started on their way. And that's one of the reasons is that we lose about 40% of our weight is muscle mass. And the sad thing is that muscles in general are actually who's eating most of the calories that we consume. And if you lose 40% of your muscle mass in a year, and then you stop the drug because it's no longer working, which it no longer works, you way overshoot because you go back to your eating patterns. The other thing that concerns me, at least in animal studies, is that animals on these drugs long term all get inflammation of their pancreas. And that bothers me a whole lot. The cool thing is you can, and I talk about this in the book, you can get your own bacteria to start making GLP-1 again like they were supposed to and turn off that hunger switch. And that's what I try to teach patients to do.
Yeah, I did so many fad crash, 500 calorie a day diets for 30 days, and then you take a little break and you do it again. I did so many of those, and I think I really messed my system up over time doing that kind of thing, and it was really hard to find just the idea of moderation and being like what kind of energy does my body require? I'm just going to put that in and fight everything else. And I'm a sober person too, and I think that has been very helpful. In the landscape where I know people are going to do my first personal diet or OptiFast or the ideal protein diet or any of these diets where it's like you eat 1,000 calories a day or less, and that's just how you diet. I think they're going to lose muscle mass also. My concern with stuff like Ozempic is that I know a bunch of people who go to clinics, they're not even really being prescribed it by medical doctors, and they're doing it for 3 months, gaining the weight back, and then doing it again because it's just easier than doing OptiFast. You don't feel hungry. Well, you feel very hungry on Slim Fast or something like that. Very hungry. If you just drink 3 protein shakes a day, you're not going to feel great. But this intervention allows you to do something like that. Look, I have no beef with somebody who's 500 pounds who jumps on a GLP-1. I think like get the weight off. Good for you. I'm not. I would never say anything against anything. People have their stomachs removed, and I think that GLP-1s to me seem like a better intervention than that kind of surgical thing. But for the many millions of Americans who do these diets throughout the years, now it's just going to be easier to do them. And I think what will likely happen to those people is their weight will either inch up or stay the same, and their body fat percentage will go up. And that's my fear. I'm not saying like if you're obese, do it, dude. If you've tried other stuff, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be doing it, but recognize that it is a long-term thing. It's not something you do like there was a diet 10 years ago, I remember, where you got a shot of
HCG.
Yeah. So it's like that. You do that for 30 days, you're done. You can't do it again right away. And then you gain the weight back and then you do it again. You know what I mean? I don't think that these are meant to be used that way.
No, I hope they're not, although it's obviously a big business, and you're right. There are telemedicine folks that'll, give you this for just clicking on your internet and no questions asked. So
yeah,
buyer beware.
Right. Buyer beware is right. All right. So the repair to the microbiome is fiber
and fermented foods.
And fermented foods.
Or the products of fermentation. For instance, like a vinegar, or like kefirs or kombucha. Now, the problem with most kombuchas, most Americans hate sour stuff. And there's so much sugar added to most kombuchas to make them tolerable. So you got to be very careful. You don't just Oh, kombucha, that's fermented. That's good for me. You got to read the back of the label. It's amazing. There's some of these kombuchas have as much sugar as a 12-ounce cola, and health drink. So you just have. It's the same with a lot of yogurts. Most people don't like the tanginess of yogurts. And so people put in sugar or even worse, things like sucralose, Splenda. And I mean, a Duke study years ago showed that one packet of sucralose will kill off 50% of your microbiome. One packet.
Really?
Yeah.
And then that's just not coming back?
Not coming back. There's a husband and wife microbiology team at Stanford by the name of the Sonnenbergs, and I have a lot of respect for them. They're great researchers. They are kind of the doomsayers of our microbiome. They think that most of us have a desert wasteland instead of a tropical rainforest, and they really despair that we will ever be able to rebuild that tropical rainforest. I'm a little more optimistic because I can see it in my patients. We measure the microbiome, we measure leaky gut. It's a real thing. And we can see it repair itself, but it takes a long time. Takes most people 9 months to a year to get this back in order. So it's not
Do you
not a
have
quick.
to do you have to take will you repopulate it just by fermented foods and fiber, or do you actually have to, like, where's the grass seed in that equation? I understand you're fertilizing it and you're watering it, but where does the seed come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's subject to debate. These bacteria are on everything. Believe it or not, leaves have their own microbiome. Spices have their own microbiome. Root vegetables have their own microbiome. And so, again, well, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and my family had a vegetable garden, which was called a victory garden from World War II. And, we go out and pull a carrot out of the ground, and, we didn't get out our antiseptic spray.
No,
And
you dust it off.
yeah, wipe it on your pants and eat it, right?
Yeah.
And so we were constantly inoculating ourselves with these bacteria. There's really cool evidence that people who have dogs or outdoor cats, not indoor cats, have a much richer microbiome than people who don't, because the dogs bring in, the dirt microbiome and they lick your face and they inoculate you with it. So this stuff is always around us, but we number one, we shouldn't kill it off. Number two, there are some keystone species that I write about in the book. One's called Akkermansia. What's very interesting about Akkermansia, and there's a lot of debate, there is one company that I like a lot that sells living Akkermansia. And they've proven that it reaches where it's supposed to go, which is the large bowel, the colon. But there are studies, very good studies, that you could swallow dead Akkermansia and achieve the exact same result. And you go, how's that? Well, in my last book, Gut Check, I've got a chapter, Dead Men Tell No Tales, but Dead Bacteria Do. And what I mean by that is the cell wall of a bacteria contains huge amounts of information. It's like a barcode. And believe it or not, bacteria can read the barcode on another bacteria. And so let's use Akkermansia, which is a very important species in the gut. Let's swallow some dead Akkermansia, gets down below. The other bacteria read the barcode and they go, whoa, Akkermansia is in the house. You woo, woo, woo. And they go,
Even if it's dead.
even if it's dead, they think it's alive. And it's that message gets them doing all these other crazy things. So that's the exciting thing. We're just now beginning to realize that the the system is so much more complex than any of us could have ever imagined. And we get to learn how the system operates literally with every passing day.
Yeah. It is a wild thing. I remember hearing somebody talk about bacteria and saying, like, if aliens came down and were just perceiving life forms, they would not look at us and see me and you. They would see a whole lot of bacteria.
Yeah, bacteria have been here 3 billion years. We've been here 100,000 years. Um, they've figured this out. And there are many of us who think that we just happen to be a mobile unit to carry our bacteria around to hopefully get them what they need. And if we get them what they need, then they're more than happy to keep us around.
Right. But otherwise, they'll just get rid of us. Right. That's a cool theory. I don't hate that.
Yeah, get over it. Like I say, they've had a bit of practice at this. We're newbies.
Yeah. So to a person who has had uh, broad spectrum antibiotics, Advil, and lots of glyphosate, the they do need the seed. It can't just be. It's not just fermented foods and fiber.
Well, they will get plenty of these quote seeds just from
Oh, just from right, like you said, a leaf has its own microbiome.
just from eating whole foods. And I go through in the book that maybe spices are so good for us, not so much because of what are called the polyphenols in spices, but because of the bacteria that they contain. And we have to stop being bacteriophobic. And I talk about that in the first part of the book. This phobia came from the late 1800s, from a war between two chemists in France, Louis Pasteur of Pasteurized, and his arch competitor Antoine Béchamp. And Louis Pasteur thought that bacteria were evil and they were bad guys. Béchamp said, no, 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 no. This is bacteria exist in what they called the terrain, where there were good guys and bad guys, and it's a tropical rainforest. And if one guy gets out of control, that's when it becomes a problem. But otherwise, as long as everybody's making nice, it's not a problem. Well, Pasteur apparently was a much better public speaker.
Yeah, he clearly won this war.
Yeah, he won this one. And he did one really smart thing. He determined that wine went bad from bacterial contamination. Wine is fermented by yeast, and bacteria will turn it into vinegar. They use a different fermentation process. So the King of France, if you save the French wine industry, you're a pretty important guy.
Right.
So the germ theory, Pasteur's germ theory, won. But what's really interesting, and I've read every book about the two of them, almost all the books agree that on Pasteur's deathbed, he called Béchamp to his side and said, "You're right, it is the terrain." Yeah, sometimes, but the problem is the germ theory won, and to this day, mouthwash commercial kills 99.9% of germs. You're supposed to be in there, folks.
Right. Right. Nothing wrong with rinsing your mouth out in the morning, but you could probably get if there's nothing out of whack in the terrain, maybe your breath wouldn't be bad.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Lots to think about here. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was enlightening. I can't wait to go drink some vinegar right now.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Put it in your water, and you'll have a happy cola, as I like to say.
Yeah.
Will improve your.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Gundry.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You too.